target very hard to meet. The question is, absent a 100% solution on the timeline projected, are current programs adequate to mitigate the risk, or to what extent are they adequate to mitigate the risk? If not, what needs to be done? For fiscal year 2009, Congress provided over $1 billion in funding to CBP and DNDO to address international cargo and container security. This funding covers technology research and deployment, international programs, and automated screening systems. These programs are now becoming more established, with the CSI program in 58 countries, and the Secure Freight program past its initial pilot stage, but I must say, without a clear destination. We will want to learn how CBP and DNDO plan to ensure these programs are optimally focused to reduce present risk and to give us indications of what our future direction can and should be. Radiation detection and source identification are key elements of cargo security, and they continue to be problematic. We continue to await completion of testing and certification of next-generation advanced spectroscopic portals, or ASP, which is at least 2 years behind schedule. I want to hear today what the Department's intending to do with the funding set aside to procure and deploy systems in the absence of ASP. I also want to hear how DHS plans to implement radiation detection systems in environments that have been a major vulnerability gaps, such as rail cargo and transshipment. Apart from scanning for radiation, security involves knowing the participants in the trade process. CBP has grown its Customs Trade Partnership Against Terrorism program over the last 8 years. It's implemented advanced manifest requirements and has initiatives such as its FAST program to vet commercial drivers. Last year, CBP released its Importer Security Filing Rule, also called 10+2, requiring businesses to supply additional data elements about cargo and carriers as required under the Safe Port Act. Promoted as a way to improve targeting, the rule faced some industry opponents who claimed it would impose costly new administrative burdens. I would like to hear how this rule is being implemented, what results it's bearing in terms of greater awareness of potential threats, as well as increasing the margin for taking preventive or protective action. Finally, with the rising concern about violence along the U.S.-Mexican border, the administration has proposed an enhanced outbound inspection process for southbound traffic. We'd like to understand what witnesses think about the infrastructure, staffing, and process change that such a southbound initiative entails, outbound initiative entails. Basically, we'd like a more detailed account of how this initiative will operate in the field, what sort of impact the Department hopes and expects it to have on this critically important challenge. To address these issues, we welcome back Jason Ahern, the Acting Commissioner for U.S. Customs and Border Protection, Dr. Charles Galloway, the Acting Director of the Domestic Nuclear Detection Office, DNDO, and Mr. Thomas Winkowski, the CBP Assistant Commissioner for Field Operations. We look forward to hearing from you today. As is our usual practice, your full written statements will be entered into the record. We will ask you to limit your oral remarks to 5 minutes each. Before we begin, let me recognize our distinguished ranking member, Mr. Rogers, for his comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to depart from my prepared remarks initially here because I've just learned that the Department has, in effect, put into practice de facto amnesty, because in the news reports in Seattle, where ICE had raided a company for hiring illegal aliens who were using false documents to obtain employment at the plant, now the Department has ordered that those 28 workers have been released. And not only that, they were given permission to return to work by the Department that's supposed to be protecting us against illegal aliens entering the country and gaining unlawful employment. I don't know why we need the Customs and Border Protection Organization or ICE or any of the others, even the Department, if we're going to say that it's okay to use false documents, lying to obtain a job, and then on top of that being illegally in the country. Why are we here? Now I know this agency is not, this is not their bailiwick, but I don't know why we need a Customs and Border Protection if we are not going to enforce the laws that are on the books by people using false documents to gain employment while illegally in the country and then released to go back to work. I'm flabbergasted. This is de facto amnesty. De facto amnesty. Now tomorrow we're going to be hearing from the Immigration Enforcement and Employment Verification people. And believe you me, there will be some hard questions they will be needing to answer on this matter, because this is an absolute wholesale change in policy that affects every American and every illegal alien in the country and the criminal laws of the country by lying to gain a job while being an illegal alien and then releasing from being held without bond and then giving a permission to go back to work, a work permit. Mr. Chairman, what's happening here? Have you seen the reports?
No, I have not, but I intend to.
I'll let you read the news accounts. It's absolutely unheard of.
We will have a range of immigration officials before us tomorrow.
And they better come well armed. Well, I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for my outburst, but this is significant. Over the last 6 years, DHS has made tremendous progress at improving the security of the more than 25 million cargo containers that enter the country each year. During this time, DHS has learned a great deal about allocating scarce resources to address our greatest threats and hardening the supply chain from its greatest risks. From the expansion and strengthening of programs like CSI, CTPAT, and the Secure Freight Initiative to extensive domestic deployments of radiation portal monitors, to advancements in targeting, DHS has indeed made progress by adding rigor to its risk-based approach to cargo security. Because of the scope and complexity of the cargo shipping industry, the draconian treatment of every aspect of the supply chain is simply unworkable. That's why I've consistently supported an adaptable, layered framework that facilitates an appropriate balance between legitimate trade and security. But just as many of CPB's cargo security programs appear to be reaching a level of functional maturity, and the 9/11 Act's capricious mandates are being thoughtfully reconsidered, in-transit vulnerabilities persist, and outbound smuggling is apparently growing. The export, if you will, of illegal weapons and bulk cash is part of the fuel that feeds the treacherous drug war now raging along our border with Mexico. This pervasive smuggling is also a stark reminder of the value added to security by a tamper-resistant supply chain, integrity that could potentially be assured in high-risk trade lanes through a viable container security device. Unfortunately, development of such a device continues to elude DHS, and that failure continues to baffle me. As part of DHS's efforts to confront the drug war and support Mexico's noble efforts against the cartels, CPB will reportedly embark on a new $95 million effort to screen 100% of the rail containers flowing south into Mexico and step up inspections of outbound traffic at our ports of entry. These ambitious plans appear to have merit, but they also raise many logistical questions that I hope to have answered here today. Gentlemen, since the days of Alexander Hamilton and the founding of our Customs Service, the need for counter-smuggling has remained unchanged. What has changed, however, is the combination of threats we now face: a known radical intent to do harm against the long, dark shadow of a massive drug war, And this, in addition to CPB's traditional efforts to enforce our trade laws and ferret out illegally transshipped and fraudulent goods, efforts that are vital to American manufacturers and workers who are struggling in the midst of this turbulent economic turndown. So perhaps now, as much as ever, CPB's cargo security mission matters to our national interests and way of life. For it's CPB, armed with tools from DNDO, that we are counting on to be the filter within our Homeland Security arsenal, a filter that strives to ensnare contraband and threats while allowing for the free and vibrant flow of commerce. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Ahern, we will ask you to go first, and I understand Dr. Galloway also has an oral statement. Mr. Winkowski does not have an oral statement, but we'll then turn to all three of you for questions. Please go ahead.
Very good. Good morning, Chairman Price, Ranking Member Rogers, and other members of this committee. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you today, along with our colleagues from DNDO, as well as our Assistant Commissioner for Field Operations, to discuss the work that's being done to both strengthen the security of the containerized cargo entering the United States across our borders, while with facilitating legitimate travel and trade as well. Let me begin by expressing my gratitude to this committee for your continued support for providing important initiatives, the funding needed to be implemented by CBP over the last several years. I've appeared before you previously to discuss many of the important layers that we have in our cargo security protocols that we use to manage risk. We continue to strengthen each program to better secure our country, all the while not yet stifling the international trade. This year, CBP has moved forward with a collection of additional importer security data, commonly referred to as 10+2, which will further enhance our targeting and risk assessment processes. We have continued to deploy radiation detection technology and large-scale inspection equipment to our ports of entry. Through CSI, we work in partnership with foreign counterparts to examine high-risk containers cargo before it is shipped to the United States, and we assist our trade community to strengthen their supply chain as a benefit of being enrolled in CTPAT. And while we've implemented considerable programs to secure maritime cargo and reduce the risk, the threat of a significant nuclear weapon in a maritime container remains remote. While we must look to apply our limited resources to multiple areas of threat and vulnerability, we should not overemphasize maritime containers at the potential detriment to other threat areas that are in need of resources. In my limited time remaining here, I would like to comment on the issue of 100% scanning and the Secretary's strategy announced last week with Mexico. CBP continues to go ahead and abide by the law passed by Congress regarding 100% scanning, but our concern is to ensure that this focus does not negate the effective layered risk-based strategy that is currently now in place. And as you've heard me say before this committee, no one should be misled that 100% scanning equals 100% security. But as we plan ahead and get closer to the mandatory date of 2012, we need to more seriously consider the costs and logistics involved with 100% scanning. We have long maintained that there will be significant technological, political, legal challenges, as well as the issue of how to deal with transshipped cargo. And multiple reports have been submitted to the Congress since 2007, outlining what we have learned through the 100% security protocols that have been implemented thus far. In every location, it has its own infrastructure challenges, technological challenges, environmental issues, political challenges that we must overcome. And the resource commitment to overcome these challenges must be commensurate with the additional security that we may gain. We're also challenged to determine who will incur the cost for operating and maintaining the scanning equipment. We need to conclude as far as agreements with partnering nations and terminal operators, and we need to also work out staffing implications for both foreign customs services and terminal operators. So while additional data gained from 100% scanning can be useful, challenges and expenses are significant, even in the limited environments we've currently deployed. And we must also balance this with the 11 million trucks that come across our borders, as well as 2.7 million rail cars, in addition to the 10 million containers that are coming in the maritime environment. Finally, the violence in Mexico related to the drug trafficking is a source of much concern. 3 weeks ago, I testified before this committee on the Secure Border Initiative, and border violence became the primary topic of discussion. Last week, the Secretary mandated more law enforcement personnel along the border and a greater emphasis on outbound traffic, specifically aimed at interdicting guns and money. With the Secretary's announcement, certainly CBP will play an important but not an exclusive role in her new strategy. And we've temporarily redeployed some personnel, inspectional technology, and canine assets to the Mexican border To fund this new level of sustained outbound enforcement action, CBP is looking at its existing funds for reallocation from other programs in the organization. But doing so, we must balance these increased outbound activities with significant inbound enforcement and facilitation responsibilities. Thank you again for the opportunity to look forward to the questions coming up.
Thank you. Doctor?
Good morning, Chairman Price, Ranking Member Rogers, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. It is a pleasure to appear before you with my esteemed colleagues from CBP, Acting Commissioner Ahern and Assistant Commissioner Winkowski. As Acting Director of the Department of Homeland Security's Domestic Nuclear Detection Office, I'd like to thank the committee for the opportunity to discuss challenges in container security and to highlight the work DNDO is pursuing. I'd also like to thank the committee for its support of DNDO's mission, which is to reduce the risk of radiological and nuclear terrorism to our nation. Since DNDO was formed almost 4 years ago, we have made significant strides in improving the nation's capability to detect and prevent nuclear terrorism, including major improvements in our nation's capability to scan cargo containers for rad nuke threats. Our ongoing work with CBP to facilitate container security has resulted in the scanning of 98% of all incoming containerized cargo at our land and sea ports of entry. We are working to finish the remainder of the deployments along the northern border by the end of this year, and we are addressing other previously unaddressed cargo challenges, which include on-dock rail, international rail, and air cargo. At the same time, I'd like to add that DNDO's goals extend well beyond deploying detection systems to scan cargo containers. As we have matured, we have shifted our focus to a wider range of issues and challenges and are now dedicating increased time and effort to address these other areas of concern. For instance, while DNDO has made substantial improvements in rad nuke detection technologies, we have also dedicated significant efforts to integrated rad nuke detection planning across the department and with our interagency partners. Similarly, DNDO has developed a robust operational support capability designed to enhance the effectiveness of a wide variety of operational partners, including the states and locals. Much of our insight has come from our work on the global nuclear detection architecture, which seeks to integrate efforts across the government into a single time-phase strategy to improve the nation's nuclear detection capabilities. We have been working with our partners to pursue a range of programs to strengthen the architecture by filling gaps, addressing vulnerabilities, improving technologies, building necessary infrastructure, and raising awareness about rad nuke threats and the role of detection systems in mitigating them. To be effective, the defense countermeasures in, to be effective, the defensive countermeasures in each layer, international, at the border, and in the interior, along each threat pathway, land, air, and sea, will require a multifaceted defense-in-depth approach utilizing a variety of technology and operational capability solutions. Most importantly, no single solution is effective to completely address the rad nuke threat. With that said, given the maturity of technologies and planning at the time of DNDO's formation, securing containerized cargo that is coming into the United States has been a major emphasis to date. Working with CBP, we have deployed radiation portal monitors to a majority of the seaports and land border crossings. At the same time, we have made substantial investments in the deployment of the next generation of portal monitors known as the Advanced Spectroscopic Portal, or ASP. The ASP technology will significantly improve the probability of correctly identifying and interdicting smuggled nuclear material and have the ability to differentiate between threat material and naturally occurring radioactive material, thereby reducing the number of alarms due to non-threat sources. The ASP units are currently undergoing an extensive test and evaluation campaign. The successful completion of this testing will result in data that will be provided along with other materials and reports, including a cost-benefit analysis and consultation with the National Academy of Sciences to inform the Secretary's certification decision of ASP. Radiation portal monitors are only part of the solution to detect nuclear threats at our ports. Another key DNDO objective is to address the threat of shielded nuclear material that passive detection systems, such as PVT, which are currently deployed, or even the new ASP portals, are not capable of detecting. DNDO is working with CBP on a wide range of technologies to address this concern, focusing first on radiography systems that provide the ability to automatically detect a nuclear threat or dense material that may be used to shield a nuclear threat. To address gaps in the global nuclear detection architecture that remain unfilled by current technologies or near-term improvements, DNDO has also established a transformational research and development program. We reach out to the best in class within the national laboratories, industry, and academia to conduct these efforts. And I am happy to report these research efforts are already yielding impressive results in a number of areas, including the identification of promising new detector materials. As you can see, the mission of DNDO reaches far beyond container security. Nuclear detection at our official ports of entry is but one layer of the entire global nuclear detection architecture, which encompasses a broad array of efforts to mitigate the rad nuke threat. By working with our DHS and interagency partners, DNDO is continuing to assess the best technological and operational solutions for use internationally, at our borders, and domestically. We remain committed to providing cutting-edge detection technology that can be used in a variety of environments by federal, state, local, and tribal operators to address identified vulnerabilities in the global nuclear detection architecture. Detection technologies and strategies are coupled with DNDO's operational support services to ensure that alarms are promptly resolved and detection of threats is seamlessly transitioned to operational responses. In addition, DNDO trains state and local officers to support the rad nuke detection mission. Finally, DNDO stood up the National Technical Nuclear Forensics Center as an interagency stewardship office for integrating the nation's full-spectrum nuclear forensics capability. I look forward to continuing to work with components within DHS, other federal departments, state and local agencies, and the members of the subcommittee and the Congress to keep the nation safe from radiological and nuclear terrorism. This concludes my prepared statement. Chairman Price, Ranking Member Rogers, and members of the subcommittee, I thank you for your attention. We'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks to both of you, and we will get underway. And I'd like initially to focus, Mr. Ahern, on the major topic of cargo scanning, the CSI, the Secure Freight Initiative, the underlying question pertaining to all of our discussions about this goal of 100% overseas cargo scanning required by the 9/11 Act, the extent to which that goal is being approached, whether it's ultimately perhaps a feasible or wise goal. I think these larger questions inevitably loom large as we look at the current state of play. As you know, the new secretary on February 25th said that the 2012 deadline for 100% overseas cargo scanning could not be met. And she said, quote, "We're going to have to work on what we do beyond that." Clearly, that's an accurate statement. In your statement today, you warn against focusing on overseas scanning to the detriment of other actions that could improve security while not unduly restricting trade. I want to ask you to elaborate on those trade-offs. Clearly, the date's being pushed back. The target's being adjusted to some subset, I assume, of the 700 foreign ports that ship to the U.S. I'd like to know to what extent you really are rethinking the requirement itself, the requirement for overseas scanning itself, or at least give us some sense of the proportionate place you think this should play in the overall scanning picture, and what you think is feasible, what's optimal in that regard. Would 100% scanning provide additional security beyond that either already provided by CBP's existing security programs or that you think might be achieved in a reasonable time frame. Now, this subcommittee has visited some of the pilot SFI ports, Salalah and Hong Kong in particular. We've noted that the sites chosen have generally been the smaller ports, some smaller ports or small areas of ports, such as Hong Kong. Does raise the question: is 100% screening feasible at any of these ports, let alone the idea of doing it on all of them? 7 ports were originally intended for the SFI. There were 3 pilot ports: Southampton, Cortez, and Qasim. I'd like to have an indication of what's been achieved there. And then there are 4 large seaports that volunteered to participate: Hong Kong, Busan, Salalah, and Singapore. We know that none of them screen 100% now. What do they do? What percentage of U.S.-bound cargo do they scan with both radiation and non-intrusive inspection equipment? What is the state of play here, and what does it imply in terms of long-term policy?
Try to begin with the opening question you asked. It goes back to what the Secretary stated in her hearing a few weeks ago, that the 2012 deadline does at this point appear to be unattainable. I would also caveat that as a law enforcement agency, as long as there's still a law, we still need to be focused on the law. And I think that is an issue that needs discussion as we go forward. In my experience, in my professional opinion as well, that when you take a look at identifying a solution to a problem, you have to identify what the level of risk is. And it's been our experience, and it's been also as far as the intelligence information that we've continued to receive, that the risk is relatively low and remote as the possibilities for any type of significant device to be put in a box to the United States. What you then need to take a look at is what is the level of risk reduction that's appropriate for a minimal amount of risk. And I believe as we've continued to lay the strategy in place in a post 9/11 environment, beginning with the advanced information that we're continuing to strengthen through the 10+2 implementation this year, as you take a look at continuing to strengthen the relationship we have in the CSI locations with our partnerships and building the capacity with our host country counterparts on those that do pose a risk to actually have the protocol of examining each one of those containers that do pose a risk identified. And the 58 ports we're currently deployed makes sense. When you also then take a look at dealing with the significant companies and managing and securing their supply chain to reduce vulnerability, we continue to make that program much more significant than it was in its early implementation. We have over 9,000 participants in the CTPAT program today. That is an important value-added component for the supply chain risk reduction. And then also when you take a look at the opportunity to then intervene at a level of 98%, we still have well over 400 radiation portal monitors deployed at our seaports here in the United States for one last opportunity before our containers entered into the commerce of the United States. Now, I know some have talked before and come to this committee as well as others saying, well, what about the possibility for remote detonation? Certainly there's always a possibility for everything, but at what point do we have to rely on what the risk assessment is and apply some thoughtful risk reduction for the measures that are necessary to put in place? And at what point do we need to then turn our attention to greater risks that are facing this country versus continuing to add additional layers or actually negating the investments that have been made and funded by this committee over the last 7 years for risk management and actually moving forward with a 100% requirement? So I think there's an awful lot of responsibility that I think we all share in the U.S. government, and frankly I believe that the world stage is looking at us to show some leadership on what is it we're actually going to be doing as we move forward with this issue collectively. Because it continues to churn, even though there is the challenge of meeting the 2012 deadline and all the technological challenges there, the sovereignty issues, the logistical challenges. There's still a significant amount of international churn, if you will, on what is going to be the U.S. government's position on this moving forward. And I think that's a very serious issue collectively we have to address.
There's no question it's a serious issue. And there's also no question I would think that while the risk statistically might be low as you describe it, the potential consequences are extremely catastrophic. And of course, this department, your department, is in the business of dealing with low probability, high consequence events and their prospect. And when that involves nuclear materials, nuclear weapons, then that potential consequences is heightened. But I do think the dilemma, as you pose it, is a compelling one, and one that no doubt we are going to have to deal with. I want to ask you to fill in now the second part of my inquiry, which has to do with the experience we have had with these experiments, these pilots with overseas inspection. Of course, there's a very compelling case on paper to be made for screening as much as we possibly can at the foreign ports where these ships are loaded. We've gone through this secure freight initiative with these 7 ports to some degree. Can you generalize about what that has, what we've learned? In what ways are we wiser about the feasibility of this and what it might take to achieve it? To achieve this goal of 100% or certainly a large amount of the cargo being screened overseas.
Very good. I'll begin, and I'll ask Mr. Winkowski to fill in any of the blanks that he might like to add as well. But when you take a look at the 3 locations that we began as the pilot, starting with Puerto Cortez, Honduras, we had a willing partner with the government of Honduras who already had installed the X-ray capabilities there at their expense and for their own purpose. So we had that capability already in place to build upon for then adding our presence there that was there already again through the Container Security Initiative. So we had that component there. And then we added the additional capability that Department of Energy brought with the radiation portal monitors. So that was relatively an easy partnership, if you will, to put those component parts together, integrate that, and be able to provide the integrated solution for looking at a relatively small universe of containers. The number escapes me at this time, but I think it was less than 50 or 60,000 containers a year annually that are being shipped to the United States. When you aggregate that number, it may seem significant. When you go ahead and break that down into daily transactions, it's not that significant a volume. We then looked at, as far as the location that we already had begun a partnership with in Pakistan. Port Qasim, we had a willing partner in the government of Pakistan who were willing to donate the land for, or provide the land for us to go ahead and build a footprint to be able to have a full container protocol there for radiation detection, X-ray, as well as then integrating it. Now, we did not have the benefit of having our personnel there because of the risk that is posed by U.S. personnel outside of the embassy or consular compound, and being out at the port, we were restricted for being there. But we then added the virtual capability there to remote the images to here in the United States. So we actually do watch those real time here in the United States. However, volume. Less than 3,000 containers come from Port Qasim to the United States. But I think here's an example where we need to be considering going forward. It's a high-risk location. And we need to take a look at, is that the right investment to add that protocol in place so that we actually can secure that trade lane? That makes sense to us. And before I go to Southampton to talk about that protocol, I would just pause and speak about a companion port that's still, just not given that same coverage and protocol that we have in Qasim, the Port of Karachi, very close and proximate nearby, with the similar amount of container traffic come to the United States. Now, there would be a thoughtful approach, which we're already considering and engaging with our counterparts in Pakistan, to put a similar screening protocol there, scanning protocol there, to add that capability. Again, small volume, about 3,000 containers, very manageable, and something where we could really add value to a location that could be higher risk than some of the other locations we deal with. Southampton, again, relatively small location, had the benefit of a large footprint where we could put all the different technology there, so there actually would not impact negatively throughput and capacity through that port. And we had a willing partner with the UK Customs to be part of the initial test, of which they've no longer stayed as a partnership involved. They made an investment to say, we were part of the partnership, we were part of the pilot, but it's no longer an investment we want to continue to make. So that brings in some of the host country counterpart issues that you deal with when we're trying to impose a 100% requirement in an overseas environment.
We'll return to this. Let me move on, though, to other members and their questions, starting with Mr. Rogers.
Let me ask you about the administration's announced plan they unveiled, I think, last week. a new $95 million initiative to inspect 100% of cargo containers carried by rail into Mexico as part of its plan to combat the drug cartels. Do you know whether or not there's been any known exploitation of southbound rail containers by the drug cartels?
No, there's no indication that we had as far as with particular shipments going south in Mexico for weapons that are moving through the rail environment. I would submit, though, it's one of those environments that we had not focused a significant amount of attention. We were more concerned post 9/11 with things coming into the country, and that became our foremost concern. As we now are looking to see what we can do to tighten the departure of weapons or monies going into Mexico to fuel the drug wars, that was one of the areas we wanted to take. The already deployed technology that was there for X-raying rail cars coming into the United States to be able to use that same technology that's deployed there to use it for outbound, and again, build our partnership with the government of Mexico as we do so frequently.
Well, what do we currently do on rail cars coming into the U.S. from Mexico?
Currently,
Mike.
we have been, screening. We have been screening.
And we're
Currently, we have been screening 100% coming into the United States with our imagery. With the outbound side, we just started on March the 12th. Doing 100%. So on the inbound side, what we were looking for was any type of contraband, narcotics, illegal aliens coming in.
What do you do physically to check an inbound rail car?
We take images of them. We take images of all of them. We have an operator there that looks at the images and make a decision on whether or not that particular rail car needs to be inspected further.
Now, sometimes these trains are miles long.
Yes.
How do you physically go about doing that without disrupting the flow?
Well, what happens with the technology that we have, we're able to take an image of what's inside that rail car. And from there, we make a decision on whether or not there's any type of
While the train
anomaly.
is moving?
Yes, that's correct. It's
How
moving
how fast is the train going?
about 5 miles per hour.
And you X-ray every car?
Yes.
What's been the results? Can you?
We have had results from the standpoint of narcotics and illegal aliens coming into the United States.
How many and how much?
Not quite. I don't have the numbers as far as how many illegal aliens or narcotics. I'd be more than happy to get back to the committee on that.
And what about outgoing train cars moving south?
Yes.
What do you do about them?
Same as what we're doing on the northbound side. Our technology is bidirectional, so when we have a train that's coming south, we put that imaging equipment on the southbound lane and do our inspection. By the way, since we've started this initiative on March the 12th, we've examined about 24,000 rail cars and over 300 trains.
Exiting into Mexico?
Yes, and we have a very strong partnership with our counterparts in Mexico.
Did you find anything?
No, we have not. We had several anomalies working with the Mexican government. It turned out to be clay and things of that nature that came up on our imaging equipment.
Well, what about guns, illegal guns?
We have not found any.
Illegal cash?
No.
How would you see cash on an X-ray?
That would come out. It would be in a void within the rail car, and that imaging equipment would pick up that void with packages in it. Same as you do on the narcotic sides coming in.
How long have you been doing the X-rays of outgoing cars?
Outgoing cars, we started on a regular recurring basis. There's 8 crossings on the southwest border going into Mexico. And we started on a regular recurring basis doing every car on March the 11th.
Well, the administration is planning a $95 million initiative to inspect 100% of the containers going south. But you're already doing that.
Well, we're taking images, and those images that come up as anomalies.
But why would they announce a new initiative if you've been doing it for some time now?
Well, the new initiative being that we are doing southbound trains on a regular occurring basis. Every southbound train is being inspected with our NII equipment. So that is new from the standpoint of the sustainability of that. We're not doing that on a regular and recurring basis going south.
Where is the $95 million coming from?
I'm not sure of the $95 million. That could be a compilation of all the initiatives that we're going to be part of, because that seems to be approximately the number that we have for all of our CVP initiatives, the southbound license plate readers, for the vehicle lanes that don't currently have it, the deployment of the additional Border Patrol agents. But we certainly can give you the breakdown of all the different monies that we have as part of our
All right. Now,
southbound
when you
initiative.
stop at, when you see something in a rail car that's moving 5 miles an hour and it's 2 miles long or whatever, and you see something that is suspicious, do you stop the train?
What takes place is because of our inspection point is so close to just within matter of feet of the international boundary. What we do is we have a protocol with our counterparts in Mexico, Mexican Customs, and relay to them the anomaly that we found, share with them the image, and they do the inspection and get back to us.
Well, last week, U.S. authorities at Arizona's 6 ports of entry along the border said that you're ill-equipped to screen vehicles and trains crossing into Mexico for smuggled weapons and cash. This is dated March 30th in the Washington Post. Are they, who's right or who's wrong here?
Let me offer a comment on that. I know that that was by our field director out in Arizona.
David Higgerson.
That's correct. And as many articles are, they don't give the full context of the interview, and there's a selected quotes that are there. But I think the point that is clearly made there, and I know that Mr. Winkowski spoke to him afterwards, is that we're physically set up on the southwest border and have been for over 40 or 50 years with the infrastructure there to process northbound activity. When we actually now start to go ahead and do more southbound activity, whether it be at the rail hubs or whether it be in the vehicle lanes or the pedestrian lanes, we do not have the same infrastructure we have northbound, nor do we have the same technology deployment that we have northbound. Now, in this circumstance that Mr. Winkowski talked about, we do have the ability with the bidirectional X-ray capabilities to use that same technology to go ahead and image the containers on the rail cars going southbound.
Let me get back to what Higgerson says. And he's your director of field operations in Arizona, right?
Yes, he is.
I would suspect he knows more about this than anybody else, being in charge of it. He says that that these ports of entries have no facilities to adequately screen border crossers, cargo traffic, or freight trains bound for Mexico, that these were built and planned and designed and staffed and trained for to catch stuff coming out of Mexico into the U.S. It was never anticipated that we would need to do the opposite, but he says we don't have that kind of facilities. What about, I'm quoting, what about cargo? We don't have facilities to check cargo going into Mexico. If you're going to smuggle guns, are you going to smuggle them in a car or in a truck? Again, we have nothing in our southbound to check cargo, quote. Quote, same with trains going south. If we see an anomaly, all we can do is tell Mexican Customs because 2 seconds later, it's in Mexico. They were never designed for going south. The ports were never designed to do it. Is he?
No, I think that's very consistent with the statement I made. I mean, these facilities were set up for northbound processing.
Well, now, Mr. Winkowski says that we're extraing every car going south.
And that is correct. As far as the full facilities to be able to do complete unloading, things of that nature for southbound trains, that's where we need to rely on our counterparts with Mexico.
But Higgerson says you don't have the capability to check trains going south. No facilities to adequately screen freight trains bound for Mexico. Higgerson.
Facilities, but as far as to do the imaging, the capability is there.
You got me confused.
Just can't inspect the car.
What?
They just can't go into the car. Mexicans have to go in the
Yeah.
car.
Are you telling me that you can x-ray it, but you cannot get into it or go into it?
I think that's exactly what Mr. Winkowski stated, and that's why we need that partnership with Mexico. So if we identify an anomaly as our officers are looking at the image, they then go ahead and make the notification to the Mexican authorities on the south side of the border. That's the logistical predicament that we're faced in this circumstance. So we could choose to do nothing, or we could deploy the technology we have to see as far as if there's any effective use of it. We're not overselling this capability at all. We're just trying to see what might be an additional capability we could deploy against the potential of weapons going out in rail cars to Mexico.
Now, what about vehicles going through the ports of entry, southbound? What are we doing now about them?
Well, we're doing many more inspections of southbound vehicles. While we have some challenges with the southbound footprint, vehicles are much easier to inspect than, for example, as Director Higginson was saying, the cargo side. So we do have a protocol in place. We do have technology that's deployed down south that enables us to do inspection of vehicles. You can take these vehicles and often in many of the footprints put them off to the side and do our inspections. The cargo side of it is much more challenging. But if Mr. Higginson were here, he'd tell you that what he also stated was that we have that ability on trucks that need to be inspected and unloaded to direct that particular truck over to the import lot at the port.
Well, I've been to San Ysidro, many of us have, and other ports. San Ysidro, what is it, 16 lanes each way? Or
24.
Whatever. With vehicles lined
24,
up 2 miles to get across that border and never stopping, going through at 35 miles an hour. Are you telling me that you're checking every one of those vehicles to be sure it's not transporting guns or cash south into Mexico?
No, to going into Mexico, no. You can't do an outbound operation on a 24/7 basis like we do on the import.
So we're not doing anything. We're not checking southbound cars or trucks for anything, right?
No, we are. We are doing operations. Matter of fact, just in March, since we have developed a sustained effort, we've seized over $6.2 million going southbound in vehicles.
How do you check them?
We set up roadblocks just by the port of entry in the southbound lane. We stop traffic. We do interviews.
That's just random stops.
No, we do our interviews.
Of all vehicles?
In some cases, yes.
I'm talking about 16 lanes of traffic going south, 2 miles long, backed up, and you're checking every vehicle?
No, I'm not checking every vehicle.
That's what
we're doing it based on threat, based on some interviews that we're doing, based on our technology deployment.
Well, Mr. Chairman,
If I might just add one final point. I mean, so that there's not any concern here that's not completely addressed. There is a concern with southbound facilities. We've talked for years with our northbound facility, and I'd like everyone to bear in mind, we've talked repeatedly about the aged facilities we have in the northbound areas coming in from Mexico to the United States and our northern border with Canada. I think we've talked before, and again, we thank this committee and the Congress for giving us the money that we did receive to modernize some of the facilities for under the stimulus package. But that's only, again, a fraction of the down payment that's needed to go ahead and modernize and expand the northbound facilities. So if we're going to do the southbound activity on a sustained effort and a sustained basis into the future, that has to be now part of our planning that we're going to look at for southbound facilities to be able to do a full-bore enforcement operation. Heretofore, we've only done it on a special operation or on a pulse and surge type basis. As we're looking to try to ramp that up and increase that and do it on a more sustained basis to see what is the level of threat going into Mexico for those. But I would also state that the government of Mexico recognizes they have a responsibility for ramping up inspections to protect the sovereignty and to do border enforcement themselves. And I know that I've met with them in the last couple of weeks about the protocols that they're starting to put in place that's going to change and revolutionize how they're actually processing cars and people coming into their country.
My time has expired, Mr. Chairman, but obviously what I'm driving at here is 80%, we're told, of the cocaine coming into this country transits across that border and fuels the god-awful things that occur in this country with drugs. By the same token, the southbound weaponry and cash that fuels the war that's going on that border that threatens both our countries is also a vital piece of what we're driving at here. So it matters a lot now what goes south as well as what comes north on that border.
Thank you. Mr. Rothman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, for your service. Got a bunch of questions. Mr. Ahern, Commissioner Ahern, in your written testimony on page 3, you say the logistics movements that the risk of a weapon of mass effect to be transported in a maritime container involve logistics movements which involve multiple handoffs amongst various parties throughout the supply chain, which may, in fact, itself be a deterrent to a terrorist considering using a maritime container. And I think that's why you described the risk as being not worth the 100% inspection goal. As you may know, I represent the 9th District of New Jersey, which has the 2-mile stretch in northern New Jersey, which links my district to the Port of Elizabeth. It's been called the most dangerous 2 miles in the United States of America in terms of risk of terrorist attack. How are the logistics for putting a weapon of mass effect, as you call it, in a maritime container different than the logistics for putting a weapon of mass effect in an airplane or a rail car or a truck?
I think that is one of the points we're trying to emphasize here is that there are, in the maritime environment, depending as far as the transaction, it could have multiple handlers. It could be drivers, freight forwarders, consolidators. It would have multiple handoffs before it actually gets to the terminal operator for preparation and then loading on a vessel. And then to have confidence it would actually be on that particular vessel.
But how would you know, for example, if it's put in a package, that why is it customary for a truck driver to rip open each package and see what's in his load for that day? So, and how would it be different than getting some good into some cargo into the hold of an aircraft? Aren't there multiple handoffs there as well?
Well, again, there would certainly be multiple handoffs, and it's what I'm stating as far as that there's additional logistical challenges within the maritime environment.
Okay.
And that's not to state that there are not logistical challenges in the other environments where there's multiple handoffs. But I guess the point that I wanted to emphasize here is that there's other vulnerabilities that's out there that needs our attention versus
Yes,
focusing.
I know. I understood your testimony. Are you able to talk about those greater risks in this open session?
I think in general terms, because we've talked about it before with this committee in the last year, certainly when we take a look at areas where we do not have as much rigor and as many layers of risk reduction, although there is some, certainly, the small boat environment. A lot of small vessels in the South Florida, up in the northeastern part of the United States, certainly the Great Lakes, the Pacific Northwest, our border, to the west of San Diego. Certainly there's a challenge in those environments where we have certainly the Coast Guard, we have our maritime assets, we have intelligence as well as aviation. However, there's still a significant volume of legitimate travelers and traffic out there in those maritime small boats that we need to have a better sorting mechanism, because right now there's no rigor out there for the reporting requirements that are necessary.
In addition to the small boat environment, anything that you care to mention?
General aviation, and certainly something that was previously identified in a protocol that we were working on internally, and was stated by previous Secretary Chertoff that would be something where someone could control a significant weapon from point A to point B.
Teterboro Airport, yeah. I'm just curious, do you have an inspection regime for pleasure ships, the big cruise, family cruise ships?
Commercial cruise lines?
Yeah, the cargo that goes in there, the baggage, et cetera?
Yes, we do.
Okay. In all of the years since 9/11, if you know, in the scanning of maritime containers, have you ever found anything dangerous? You know what I mean?
In the maritime environment,
Yeah.
we have not found anything that is a significant nuclear weapon or radiological dispersal device or anything of that significance in our,
Have you found an insignificant nuclear weapon?
no, no.
Okay.
Stand corrected.
Have you found any weapon of mass effect?
No.
Any chemical or biological agents?
No.
Anything I'm missing that would be a significant threat to the homeland?
Not that no, not that I would go into either, as far as that there's some commercial merchandise. There certainly has been some weapons shipments, but not of a significant nature, although all weapons certainly can pose significant
Right.
danger.
May I ask a question, Dr. Galway? In your remarks, Doctor, you say that there are problems in the educational pipeline in terms of, I'm paraphrasing, obviously, in terms of the educational credentials and qualifications necessary to give you the qualified personnel you need. Is there anything that we can do as individual members of federal legislators or as a Congress to assist in creating incentives for our young people to go into those fields? Or are we doing that sufficiently now?
You've already helped us. One of the programs we have under our transformational research program is called an academic research initiative, and it's specifically designed to reach out into the academic environment to get work done. We're, of course, interested in the work they're doing, but just as importantly, we're interested in developing a new cadre of folks.
Yeah.
And so we're supporting undergraduate and graduate students. I mentioned that we're doing work in forensics. Forensics is another area that the scientific population is aging. And so we have made an investment in that area to also reach out to the academic environments to try to get students, and we're sponsoring fellowship programs.
Any additional help we can offer, please let us know. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In your testimony, you listed 86% of the containers inbound are being inspected, passing through the security initiative. The 14% that aren't, is that from a specific area where or is it missed at ports where we have the container examining equipment, or where does that 14% come from?
I think that makes one of the logistical challenges we face, that 86% of the container traffic flows through our 58 CSI, Container Security Initiative ports. That does not mean that they all get inspected. So when you have a volume of 58 ports that actually have transiting through there or directly departing from those 58 ports, 86% of the container traffic, the remainder of those 14% of containers that make their way to the United States come from a universe of approximately 700 ports worldwide.
So has any studies been done to try to determine if there seems to be an area of the world that you're getting more uninspected containers than other areas of the world?
Now, there certainly has been studies. I know that our team actually has very precise numbers of where all the containers actually originate from. We're into the diminishing returns of well below 1% of container traffic for any country or port that actually remains outside of those 58 where we have our presence.
Well, I woke up this morning to some guy on television saying that he was real unhappy with us about something in Pakistan and that he was going to create a significant event in the United States Capitol. So I was kind of interested in a little bit about that. Maybe it's just current events to me. But the other thing I have a question about is, have you seized any weapons crossing the border into Mexico from the United States?
Yes, we have.
What's the nature of the weapons? Are they automatic weapons, or are they just hunting rifles, or what's this? What have you?
It's a combination. We're seeing a lot of small arms, handguns that are automatic weapons. We're seeing a lot of shotguns, a lot of rifles as well. What we're seeing that we're seizing, and also what the statistics actually show, and this is something that we did get into at the last hearing 3 weeks ago about the 90 or 95% of the weapons that go into Mexico. Those are the ones that are actually identified in Mexico, are the ones that we seize at the borders going into Mexico that are traceable back to commercial sources in the United States. There's a significant amount of weapons still going into Mexico from other locations from their south or through their maritime environments as well. But what we're seeing is a lot of the small numbers that actually come across, the ones, the twos, sometimes going back about 3 or 4 weeks ago, we had one of the larger ones, which was 25 weapons. So that is kind of the size of what we're seeing, and we're seeing a lot of what's referred to as straw man purchases that go, whether it be into a commercial gun dealer or to a flea market or individual purchases, buying small numbers of weapons and take those across kind of in very small quantities, which makes the challenge even more great.
And the reason I asked the question is because I don't disagree from talking to people who regularly go to gun shows that there seem to be people coming into gun shows and buying whole tables full of weapons. But they're not AR-15s with fully automatic capability. They're shotguns and handguns, and you may call a .45 automatic a fully automatic weapon, but I call it a semi-automatic weapon. And what we're seeing on the news is that there seems to be some indication that we are smuggling fully automatic weapons into into Mexico, which to me would mean that somebody in the manufacturing business would have to be doing that, because I don't know of anyone that sells commercially fully automatic weapons, because you have to have such a huge license in order to do so, and you have to have a license to buy them too. So that's the reason I was curious if you were seeing fully automatic weapons.
We're not seeing the quantities you described or the types that you described.
So the argument that all the weapons that are in Mexico are the fault of the United States gun dealers has a little bit is stretching the truth a little bit.
I think it just needs to be put in its full context. When that number gets used, in particular when ATS uses it from its weapon tracking systems, those are the weapons that are recovered in Mexico, that are reported back, that are traceable to a commercial source here in the United States. I think readily admitted by many that are in the know of this, whether it be the government of Mexico or other officials in the U.S. government, there's a significant amount that still come from other than the United States into Mexico.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Rodriguez.
Thank you very much. And let me, the way it works on the border is as they're coming in, we check them, and then they go in, and as we're leaving, we just go by, and usually the Mexican side checks us. And that's the way it's been. Part of the legislation that I know Congressman Price, Chairman Price is looking at is for a strategy in terms of southbound, and for you guys to let us know what's needed in terms of resources to try to begin to do that, because we haven't done that in the past. It's been sporadic. Let me ask you, the customs trade partnership against terrorism, CTPAT. My understanding that CTPAT, it is that the way it's been working, that the investigations are complete that sometimes before the investigation is completed, that we just assume that the truck that comes in with dope, that truck and that company is cut off from being able to participate, and that driver. And it's my understanding is that in some cases, according to statistics, and 98% according to the Customs Border Protection, that investigations find that it was the maquiladora and the people that were filling the trucks, and that usually the driver comes in and picks it up and just takes it across, and that they're taking the hit in most cases for just taking the stuff across, when the maquiladora themselves, and can I get a clarification on that as to why, because we got to look in terms of who's doing the damage here, because if I'm the maquiladora, I'm going to keep putting the drugs in there if the guy who's going to get nailed is a driver and the truck company?
Absolutely. I'll begin, and maybe Mr. Winkowski wants to add to my answer if I leave anything out. I think what you're describing is our FAST, our free and secure trade shipments that come across the border, where you have three components: a vetted driver that's gone through a background and been issued a FAST card, yes, RFID enabled, exactly, and the carrier is actually CTPAT, meaning the truck, and then component parts could be from a CTPAT manufacturing maquiladora operation on the south side of the border. So you have those three distinct parts of the transactions that comes across as part of this whole vetted transaction. And these are supposed to be our highly confident, trusted travelers or traders coming across the border. So when there is drugs that are found in that transaction, we try to discern very quickly whether that's something that the driver was complicit and involved in, or whether it's something the carrier, again, the truck that actually drays it, not the tractor that the driver actually drives across the border, or if it's embedded in the cargo. So we look at each one of it, its own set of facts, and make a thoughtful determination of whether we should suspend. Initially, it's suspension, not revoking or actually being removed from the program. Begin with a suspension as we go ahead, which I think is the prudent thing for us to do, is to go ahead and do a rapid investigation with ICE to find out, who the complicit parties are here,
Yeah,
so
'cause
that we're not.
supposedly they lose their business completely. They won't even get any more jobs if that's the case, and if somebody set them up.
Well, I would submit that if some individuals are bringing drugs across the border that are set up, that is one thing. If there's individuals who actually are involved, that is another. And we, again, look at each one of these on their own set of facts. And if there's a particular set of circumstances you'd like us to look at, we'd be happy to do that.
I was told that most of the occur at la maquiladoras, which we seldom go after. How many cases do we have where we've gone after and we found that it's coming from the loaders at the maquiladora?
We've found it in each one of the circumstances where it's actually been loaded at the maquiladora operation. We've seen it where there's been a diversionary stop along on the way after departing from the twin plant operation. And we've seen it in the tractor where the driver obviously had knowledge of that, and we've also seen where it's actually configured in the truck, the trailer itself, before it goes to the particular location. So again,
Secondly, on ports of entry, the Presidio port of entry is supposed to be a 24-hour port of entry. And the reason why that's so important is if you have a truck on the other side, it's got to go 300 miles to El Paso or 300 miles the other way to Del Rio in order to cross. They tell me that when they find themselves, they're not going there because it's sometimes not open 24 hours. And right now they'll tell you, and yes, there's a good excuse, the flood that occurred in Ojinaga in there. But prior to that, these complaints were coming in that if it's labeled at 24 hours, that it should be at 24 hours. I have testimony by some of the constituents that go drive those 300 miles all the way to El Paso and wait another 2 hours to cross because of the fact that they're never sure whether the port of entry at Presidio is going to be open or not.
Congressman, perhaps I can answer that question. For vehicles, for private automobiles, it is a 24/7 port, as you well know. On the cargo side, it's open Monday through Friday, 10 to 6. It has been that way for many, many years. I was just down in El Paso last week, met with the trade community. As you know, the vast majority of the brokers are out of El Paso. I think we have one broker down there in the Presidio area. Nothing's ever come up from the standpoint of expansion of hours of service. Now, we have expanded on a test basis hours of service in the cargo arena in El Paso, Laredo, and Otay Mesa, and Nogales. We don't see any need from the standpoint of expanding hours from the commercial side. We average about 30 trucks a day. Now, we do have times when perhaps we're closed and a truck shows up, and I've been told by the director that arrangements are made to take care of that particular transaction, despite the fact that the commercial side's closed. So I'll be more than happy. I do a lot of trips down to Texas, and I'll be more than happy to my next visit.
Because that's the only spot that's 600 miles between Del Rio and
right.
Eagle Pass.
Right.
So.
But right now, we're talking about 30 vehicles, and the first one really actually comes in around 11 o'clock in the morning, typically.
Thank you. Mr. Calvert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I live near the border down in California, and I used to, before all this problems in Mexico, to go to Mexico often. And all the times I've gone down to Mexico, I don't think I was ever stopped on the Mexican going south. Maybe I don't hit the profile of somebody that they're going to stop, but I talk to a lot of folks that go to Mexico often, and they're not stopped. They don't inspect. They don't do interviews. Very rarely. You mentioned that the Mexican government is going to enact some kind of inspection regime. You believe that to be the case?
I actually do believe it to be the case, and I've seen evidence of the first implementation that's over in the Brownsville-Matamoros corridor.
Well, certainly we haven't seen it in California. I'll tell you, as you know, in San Diego, for instance, there's a significant problem with stolen vehicles crossing over into Mexico, and we've had very little cooperation from the Mexican government, and I suspect that that's in a lot of the border communities. The cars disappear, head across the border, and both in keeping those cars from crossing over, because typically what happens if a car is stolen, there's an immediate police report, especially if you're near the border, and they're supposed to inform the Mexican government of that, and they're supposed to stop it, but very rarely I ever hear of them stopping these cars. And it would be helpful if they're going to do that, but you're confident that the Mexican government is going to do this?
I'm confident they've begun an initial deployment of having a border protocol with technology to include license plate readers. Now, one of the things we need to talk with them about is how do we link that into databases where they can be more tactical and effective going forward. That's going to be part of the continuing dialogue that we're going to offer our assistance on.
Yes, because as you know, when you cross back over in north, virtually everybody is interviewed. If you look suspicious, they inspect the automobile to make sure that you're not carrying contraband or whatever, or buying stuff in Mexico you shouldn't be buying and bringing it back to the United States. It would be interesting to see if the Mexican government is going to do that. But I haven't seen any evidence of that, and so I hope you keep the committee informed of their progress. I'm sure we'll be interested to see if that happens, because I do think they have a responsibility, obviously, to protect their own sovereignty and not just the United States to protect their sovereignty. Another issue on this detection issue. Obviously, it's a significant amount of money to put this detection equipment out there. And before that happens, do you undergo tests with outside consultants or whomever to see if they can defeat that technology before that's put into place? I guess that's a question for Mr. Galloway.
I'm sorry, would you clarify the last part? Do
you bring in outside people who are independent of the United States government to see if they can defeat your technology? In other words,
do we red team the technology?
Right.
I wouldn't say that once the technology is actually implemented, we do work with Customs and Border Protection to actually red team the operations in the field. And so it's red teaming not only the technology but the operational protocols that go with it.
Yeah, because the technology to develop a nuclear weapon is significant.
But what
I suspect the technology to defeat the technology to detect that is not as significant.
Well, on these passive detectors, we have done extensive amount of testing where we go out to the Nevada test site and using real special nuclear material, we'll run in front of these portals to see if our detection equipment can detect it, in fact. And as we're developing the new system, that's one of the things we're trying to make sure is that it meets the specifications that we've laid out. The unfortunate thing is passive radiation detection devices can be defeated by putting shielding over the material so that the emissions coming off the nuclear material
wouldn't one of our enemies think of that? I mean, don't you think if they're going to try to bring in a weapon of mass destruction that they would try to make sure they could get it in?
Precisely, and that's why the other half of the program then is to use radiography or some type of active interrogation system where we can pick it up. Because now when you've put the shielding around it, the shielding material tends to be what we call high Z, or very heavy material, and now it comes up very essentially black on an X-ray or most radiography images. And so by putting both systems in, we have high confidence that we can in fact keep someone from smuggling something through the...
But you test that to make sure. You give somebody a challenge and see if they can defeat it.
Definitely.
Before we spend the money to go out there. One last question. This ACE program, obviously modernization is important, and this new automated commercial environment to process cargo that's coming to the United States. Can you update us on where you're at with that, on the implementation of ACE?
I'd be happy to give you a detailed answer if you'd like. If I can give you a very quick overview that.
Just give us a quick overview and submit to the record.
Absolutely. Quick overview that we've actually been successful in implementing the truck manifest portion, which was important for our cross-border targeting as well as for the commercial protocols. Beginning actually Easter Sunday, we'll be having our first deployment in Buffalo for the entry summary, which will be the first part for getting the entry summary, which is the commercial aspect of the border transactions, and we'll be doing additional deployments right after that in the entry summary environment, and then we'll begin the vessel manifest and air manifest thereafter. We are lagging behind, and I'll be happy to give you a full detailed answer on each one of those increments and where we are and why we're behind.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Ruppersberger.
Yeah, first thing, very difficult job that we all have, and especially since 9/11. I feel very strongly you always need goals, but you know we're appropriators, and our goal as an appropriator is to create the priorities and try to put the money in the best place where it's going to work. And the goals of checking every container, it sounds like a good goal, but is it realistically helping the issue or the problem, or are we addressing an issue that looks good? For instance, there was a lot of comparisons made with Hong Kong, that they literally somehow inspected every container, but could they really determine what we were looking for in those containers because of the volume? The other thing I'm going to try to address, if I can in my period of time, I believe strongly that the port of embarkation is something that we have to deal with other countries. We have programs that exist. And that's something that I haven't heard a lot here today, but I think it's very important that all the different United States agencies, whether it be in Homeland Security, whether it be CIA, NSA, military, whatever, need to really come together as a team from an intelligence point of view and prioritize in that port of embarkation. You made a comment that in Pakistan it might be dangerous for one of our Americans to be at the port. Well, there are ways to deal with that type of issue, and I would address that if you can. And the other thing is technology. It's another issue that we're dealing with as far as making goals about checking every container, but we're really not doing the job. Technology is continually and constantly evolving, but there is some technology out there that I think today that is starting to deal with the issue, and Mr. Galloway, maybe you could address this, the issue of nuclear weapons. And they're not going to bring a weapon in, they're going to bring components of the weapons that come in. An example, I represent the Port of Baltimore. 2/3 of the population in our country is in one overnight drive from that area. So, there are target areas like New York, like LA, and those type of arenas. But the only way we're going to take this to another level is with technology. And if you can address where you think the technology is. And also, do you work with the Department of Energy? I know there's a proliferation group there that's very aggressive and literally goes to other parts of the world to see where these components can be made from the very beginning stage. And I assume that you work closely with them. And so I've raised 3 issues. If you could try to address them in my 5 minutes, give it a shot.
Okay, let's start with the last one first. We work with the entire community, the Department of Defense, the Department of Energy, the Department of State, Department of Justice, to try to work this problem all the way from the origin of the material and its potential movement towards a target here in the United States.
Good.
And so we want to be able to put in a layered defense so we have an opportunity to interdict that material anywhere during that transfer. And I think it's that layered defense that actually will set us up for success. If I can address the issue of technology, we are trying to push the boundaries because the detection technology that we have today is okay, but I think to solve the problem long term, we need better technology. And that's why we have this transformational research program where we're looking for...
Well, let me stop you there. What kind of technology? To begin with, you're doing containers, your people on the port have the handheld. Right. Are we able to get to that level? Because if you don't have the handheld at this point, there's not the mechanism, I assume, out there for every port, 539 ports in this country, or the ports of embarkation.
Right. Let's even start smaller than
right.
that. The Customs and Border Protection folks wear a pager device right now that just tells you if there's radiation in the area. We're working on a replacement to that is a spectroscopic device that could actually, it's considerably smarter, so that it would be able to tell them, is it in fact a threat to worry about, or is it some benign material? The big breakthrough that we're looking for in the near term is improved materials. Unfortunately, the detector materials that we have right now are kind of limited in their capability, and they tend to be very expensive. And so with the new materials that we see on the horizon, we think we'll be able to increase the sensitivity by a factor of 2 at least. We would be able to reduce the cost by maybe a third. And since the detector material is a significant cost of the actual detection box, now all of a sudden you've doubled the capability and probably cut the cost in half. So the handhelds you were just talking about, that would be a big improvement. Now that we can put twice as many out in the field and have twice as good a capability.
There's one component you always have to deal with, and these are people, and probably Mr. Ahern or to you, Mr. Winkowski. Is that it? Okay. The issue of corruption at a level where you might have a handheld, but someone has paid a certain bribe or whatever to check it. Do we have checks and balances to counter check with one individual is responsible for these screening?
I would say that it's a rare circumstance in a maritime environment where there would be one person who would be involved with the protocols by themselves.
Okay, that's good.
And I would also offer, and it would be good for Congressman Calvert, if I have the opportunity to mention this before he goes, in addition to the testing that gets done during the acquisition cycle prior to the full system qualification and final acceptance testing, what we have actually been doing in Customs and Border Protection for close to 3 years now, and it was actually codified as part of the Safe Port Act, is actually do red teaming of our protocols. Beyond just as far as seeing if the technology works, do then the officers actually follow through with all the protocols that are appropriate, to include the handheld devices, to include as far as the reach back that is required to our laboratory and scientific services here in the Northern Virginia area. That's first done with a covert team that goes in. We actually set up our own commercial trucking company to go ahead and do this and have a source material to actually test the devices as well as the officers and response protocols. And then what we do beyond just as far as the initial covert test in a port, we then test the capabilities of all the different technology that's there in the environment. We'd be happy to provide more detail.
Okay,
on
one thing on technology too. Have you seen the Port of Dubai? My time is up. Well, that's
Yes,
okay.
sir, your time's up, so please wrap up.
I can wrap. Okay, Port of Dubai. They are considered at least 6 months ago to have the best technology in the world. Have you looked at their technology now, where they are, and as it relates to where we are in the United States?
Yes, sir. I mean, that's one of our functions, to stay on top of the technology that's out and about. And when you look at some of this in detail, you find out the technology is not quite as promising as the sales brochures.
Okay, time. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Farr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's interesting listening to these discussions because I think I go home to my little community where people still don't lock their door, and there's essentially still a lot of places in America where there's a lot of trust. And I come to Washington, and we are certainly dealing with the fear in America, and you just wonder whether we're developing a whole new industrial complex based around fear. And I know that's your job to make sure that that we are secure, and I appreciate the work you do. I hope that we can begin talking about a hemispheric security. It really seems to me that we need to make sure that all of North America is secure, and I think we put a lot of emphasis on knowing Canada, that Canada is secure, and therefore we don't have to worry about Canada. We have to worry about Mexico, and I think it's more because of the poverty in Mexico and the pressure it puts on people, undocumented people coming to this country, and the fact that the cartels coming up from South America have been very effective. And I wondered to, in your comments about. And I appreciate Mr. Rogers' questions about going south, because I was at a dinner last night, and the Mexican ambassador was telling us that of the $8 to $12 billion is what they think is the drug business, $8 to $12 billion. That a lot of this cash is being transported in cash, in sacks of cash, and that is the kind of, and that's laundered money, probably in a laundry bag. That we could detect with your kind of equipment, couldn't we, in those rail cars and automobile cars going south?
The technology that we deploy for imaging doesn't discern whether it's a package of cocaine or a package of currency or it will certainly show as far as the outline of a weapon, if that's the distinct image we're looking at, versus a block of weapons where you just see the anomaly that would be inconsistent with the rest of that particular conveyance.
So we can or cannot detect sacks of cash?
Yes, you can.
Okay. So I think that there is a, if we're going to really try to have this bilateral security, and then we've got to do our part as a partner, in the buy process. If we've got to make sure that activities which are illegal in their country, having guns, that's illegal in Mexico. You have no Fourth Amendment right to commit a crime in Mexico by selling weapons to people that are taking them into Mexico, or by laundering money, that we have to do our fair share if we're going to have any credibility to crack down on where our side is committing crimes. I mean, there's a crime problem on both sides of the border. I got into, after going to Hong Kong, really came away with a different concept about this total 100%. It seems to me that it's not cost effective. And I wondered, you made a statement that our forces on risk management and security has to be driven by our informed judgment about the totality of the risks. And I wonder if you could just give the committee some of your feelings as a professional of maybe where we've done overkill, where it is not cost effective, where we can use our informed judgment to look at the real risk, because this really is about risk management. And I think we're looking at things that are big enough to cause a tipping point, a problem. So how would you, if you were on this side, suggest that Congress might better focus its limited resources on your informed judgment?
We did have an opportunity at the beginning of the hearing to talk about that, and I'll be happy to state it again, that again, any type when you put together a law enforcement strategy, you have to take a look and first assess what the risk is. And in this particular circumstance, we think there's a minimal amount of risk. We then need to take a look at the layers of risk management, risk reduction that we've put in place. That begins with advanced information. We're hardening that this year with the 10+2 requirement that's going to add to the information we can then take and run through our automated targeting systems to go ahead and assess risk based on all the different factors that are going to be present in now the documentation. And we're getting more deeper into the supply chain by not only that information, but also through our partnership with some of the most significant companies in the world to add more security protocols for the transactions. It's another layer of risk reduction. Mm-hmm. In 58 overseas ports, where 86% of the container traffic comes through, we have close to 200 officers between CBP and ICE overseas actually trying to go ahead and identify if there's additional risks that the systems don't identify, and then deal with our host country counterparts to mitigate that prior to lading.
Yeah, I read that in your testimony. I appreciate that. I guess my question goes to then, what are we asking you to do things that are not cost effective?
As I stated also, that was going to be my conclusion point, is that I believe with the layers of risk reduction we have in place, matched again the minimal risk, that we do have more significant vulnerabilities we should be focusing our attention on.
So where's the savings?
Pardon me?
What do we drop?
Well, I think clearly, as far as given the technological challenges, given the financial investment, given the sovereignty issues overseas, I think certainly as far as the 100% requirement needs to be thoughtfully reconsidered.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Robert-Allard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. I actually want to ask about the inspections overseas. According to a 2008 GAO report, full cooperation by participating foreign governments is sometimes lacking. For example, it is my understanding that at overseas ports, CBP agents are not allowed to observe inspections of suspicious containers that conducted by foreign officials. So my question is what can be done to strengthen that relationship so that you can fully participate in the container inspections? And if that's not possible, what is or can be done to provide the level of security that you're seeking for these inbound containers?
Right, and that is certainly a challenge in one particular country, and that's China, where we have challenges as far as being able to be there alongside when either the image is taken or when an inspection is needed. that is something that we continue to try to work through. But China is a challenge on that particular issue. I think outside of that, we've been able to work through those protocols very well. And again, I think it goes back to the point that Congressman Ruppersberger brought up as far as goals. The goals are not to look at 100% of even those at the current CSI ports. It's look at 100% that pose risk based on the analysis, based on the review of the information, based on the host country intelligence as well as our DHS intelligence, to be able to focus our resources on those that pose risk and then deploy on those. And it would be the same thing with the CSI locations. Even though it's roughly 1% that actually get looked at in those CSI locations, those are the 1% that pose the most significant risk based on our assessments and based on intelligence, and that's how we should be deploying our resources going forward. But we do recognize in certain locations like China, there's still challenges we continue to work through.
I don't know if the point had been made earlier, Mr. Chairman. I was in another hearing, but I know that the Port of Los Angeles has expressed similar concerns about the requirement for the 100% inspection, and one of the concerns is that there may be retaliation by foreign countries who will then say they want us to inspect 100% any cargo that is leaving the United States, and that it would increase the cost. And what I'm hearing is it's really not that effective in being able to do that. Was there any comment made about that, or could you expand just a little bit? I apologize that I wasn't here earlier.
Absolutely, no, that is a critical point. I would change the R word to a different word. It would not be retaliation; it's reciprocity. And we've actually had in previous hearings brought before this committee and others here in Congress 27 letters that were actually provided by foreign countries saying that if this 100% requirement goes forward, they expect that there will be reciprocity on containers departing the United States to their country. We also had 2 from international organizations such as the WCO, the World Customs Organization, as well as the European Union, the European Commission, stating the same concerns, that they would actually be asking for reciprocity as well if we move forward with the full implementation of this in the future.
Okay. And do you see that creating a problem at the ports where it would be impossible to do that, so that there would be this backlog and shipments would be delayed considerably, raising costs? That was another concern that was raised.
Without question.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, we'll have a quick second round of questions with your indulgence. We appreciate the chance to circle back around and close a couple of loose ends here, and also broach an additional area of questioning or two. The previous questioners have gotten into considerable detail on this plan for outbound inspections and southbound inspections on the southwest border. I will not go further into that except to say that I would like to supplement the oral testimony this morning with a fuller written account of what this plan looks like. We hear that it's going to involve not just more Border Patrol agents, but also canine teams, NII systems, license plate readers. We have some preliminary indications as to what the appropriations request is likely to contain here. For example, $45 million for license plate readers. We know that you will probably spend a good bit of the Recovery Act NII money for this, or we assume that that's a possibility. We'd like to have whatever details you can furnish on that, and of course we will await the detailed 2010 budget request to get this a little more completely in our sights. But for now, it would be very helpful for you to give a more detailed account of what this program is going to look like, and of course any follow-up you want to give us on the oral account you gave us today of what the present capacity looks like. Secondly, on the question that Mr. Farr was just raising and that I raised earlier about the Secure Freight Initiative and this 100% goal. We have had a good discussion here. I was not totally clear, Mr. Aaron. I was rushing on a bit as you concluded your initial statement. I was not entirely clear in what you were saying about these 3 small pilot ports. Did we, in fact, have we, in fact, achieved 100% screening at Southampton, Cortez, and or Qasim? And then, of course, the further question is the question perhaps raised by Hong Kong. Now, we visited Hong Kong. Hong Kong, I assume some of the things you were saying about the rest of China does not apply to Hong Kong in terms of the level of cooperation. My impression is that Hong Kong is a well-run port, in many ways one of the most impressive international ports, that it is a place where we have had good cooperation with the local authorities. And yet, the 100% screening that we're talking about applies to only 1 lane of 1 terminal. So, you know, I don't know what lesson we draw from the successes of some of these pilots. We've achieved the more comprehensive screening in some very, very limited circumstances, but it seems to me they raise as many questions as they answer about how scalable this is and how much it how well it can work even at a place like Hong Kong, to say nothing of other ports where there are many, many more difficulties.
And absolutely, you did hit on the fine point of that. I mean, it certainly, when I was describing those 3 small ports, we have been able to achieve 100%, and that was what was reflected in the report that we owed Congress under the Safe Port requirement for the 180-day testing that was done there. So we did go ahead and affirm that in the report. However, when you then now take a look at larger ports, even ports that are even marginally larger than the ones that we actually went out and did the testing protocols in, certainly we start to recognize very clearly the legitimate challenges that are out there. And when you take a look at Hong Kong as one example, I've also visited Hong Kong when the first ISIS, the Integrated Container Inspection System, was marketed at that particular point in time. And it was misrepresented as far as what its capability was, that it was able to scan and do 100%. Well, it was 1 lane in 1 terminal. And there was certainly, as far as concerns with the capabilities of the technology and how the response protocols were going to be realized. So certainly those are still challenges that are out there. And even in a good place like Hong Kong, where we have tremendous port authority to deal with, good host country counterpart support, as well as from the major terminal operators there, it's not without a significant challenge.
All right, thank you. Let me move on to a new topic, but one I hope we can deal with briefly. It has to do with the technology for these ASP monitors and where we are on that. These ASP radiation portals have been underdeveloped for several years. They're identified. They're intended to both detect and identify radiation sources. That's with major improvements on the present system, but we know that program's 2 years behind schedule. So, Dr. Galloway, when will you finish field validation testing of the 2 systems that are currently in competition in terms of ASP? When will we see a certification that these monitors have met a standard of operational effectiveness? And then finally, what about the interim plans? If certification is further delayed, what are you going to do with your plans to acquire 50 ASP systems this year and acquire or to acquire existing technology PVT systems? What's the requirement in the near term? We're covering gaps, I suppose. We're replacing older PVTs that have passed their useful life. I understand there's a good bit of money in the budget, $120 million for 2009, that could be used to obtain these PVT systems as needed. On the other hand, you're talking about buying machinery that we hope is going to be superseded in a very few years. So I want to know the state of the ASP program, but I also want to know about how many PVT monitors at what cost you think we're going to need, given the time frame we're facing with the ASPs.
If I could start with the last part of your question first, we're continuing to build out the northern border and deploy PVTs so that we've gone to 100% scanning opportunities on the northern border. And so that's what we're using a lot of our 09 funds to do. As far as the status of the ASP system, we're in field validation testing, which is done hand in hand with our colleagues from Customs and Border Protection, because we're now out in a real port of entry operation. We were in what we call tandem operation, where we've got the current detection system running at the same time that we have an ASP. When we looked at the data that we were receiving, we had a few concerns that the system may not have been working quite as well as we'd hoped. And so we've paused the testing for a bit while we're analyzing the data. We anticipate that pause is probably going to go for about another month while we decide what to make of it. I'm optimistic that we'll be able to solve the issue, and then we would start up field validation testing again. We would do some work back in tandem operation, then go into what we call solo operation, where they turn off the existing systems and run exclusively with ASP, and that would take several more weeks. What all that means to the program is we're probably looking at certification of our first system. We have two competitors right now, and the first system would be at a point where we could take it to the Secretary for certification sometime about the end of this fiscal year.
All right, I will leave it at that for now, because our time is limited. But I am going to ask you to submit for the record, and we will expect this as part of the detailed 2010 budget submission as well. A more determinate answer than you gave me on the PVT point. I mean, I would like to have a fuller understanding of this ASP timeline that you're projecting, and the kind of confidence you have in it. But then also, what are we talking about with respect to these PVT systems and the you say we're going to fill out the northern border stations? Okay, what's the scale, the scope of that? What kind of money are we talking about, especially in next year's budget, given the fact that there is money already sitting unused in not just in '09, but I think some funds from previous years, and given the fact that we clearly need this capability, but we're also talking about systems that are hopefully going to be superseded in terms of their capabilities.
Right. As I mentioned, finishing out the northern border will be done with the current funding that we have in hand to date.
You can definitively state that.
Correct.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Rogers.
How many containers come to the U.S. From Mexico a year or a month or whatever?
Off the top of my head, I can't give you the breakout between Canada and Mexico, but I know that the number of trucks that cross our border is about 11.5 million. Per year. Totally between both borders.
Mexico.
Yes, from U.S. to Mexico and also Canada to Mexico. That's our universe of trucks. I just don't have that breakdown on the top of my head for you.
Well, suffice to say that there's quite a flow of containers by truck from Mexico, right?
Yes.
And vice versa.
Yes.
What has been the history of the searches of those containers coming in or going from the U.S. across the border? What's been the history of what bad things we found?
We've actually found significant amounts of drugs in commercial trucks coming from Mexico into the United States.
In the containers?
In the trucks coming across the border, yes. The commercial trucks coming.
I'm interested in containers.
Well, I think we're saying the same thing. A truck with a trailer is what I refer to as that transaction, functional equivalent of a maritime container.
Yeah, and what about those going south?
Going south, as far as we've not put that level of energy southbound as we have northbound.
Well, on the northbound, or on either bound, if we had a way to be sure that a container was not tampered with in transit, from when it was loaded at the factory in Mexico until it got to wherever it was going in the U.S., if we had a way to know that it had not been opened and tampered with by a truck driver who had been bought off by the cartel, would that not be a major advance?
That would be an additional layer of security that we would be very much interested in. It goes to Congressman Rodriguez's scenario with the fast trucks coming across, whether it happens once it leaves the point of loading at the maquiladora and gets diverted along the way, or the driver becomes compromised along the way. If you have a certified container security device that we have confidence in that would alarm us if it's been tampered with, that would be a critical piece to know at the border when it arrives.
Well, it would be tremendous, would it not?
If the device we had high confidence and it was functioning well, to be able to secure a box from the point it was stuffed by people we have confidence with till it arrives at the border, that would be a value added, yes.
Well, we started working on this when I first when we first started this subcommittee, even before that. And we've been on it now for, I don't know, 7, 8, or 9 years or more. And you know, we invented the automobile and airplane in less time than that. What is it so difficult about making a container security device that we can have faith in? Will we have one in my lifetime? Or your lifetime? Or the lifetime of the country? Will we ever have a gizmo that can tell us whether or not a box has been opened or not?
I certainly hope so, sir, because we've had this discussion many years in a row, and I certainly do look forward to being able to sit before you one day and say that the industry has been able to provide the solution that is acceptable for the operating agency.
It would revolutionize the way that we secure containers coming to us from all over the world. For example, if we had a certification by the manufacturer in Hong Kong that he has packed a container of his equipment and it has been sealed, and we have a gizmo that can tell us whether or not it was in transit across the ocean and by rail and truck or wherever it went, that it had not been opened or tampered with. Think of the savings we could engender by not having to x-ray or open and search, and commerce would be speedily moved along, and we could rest assured that we were not having a box that had been opened and an A-bomb placed in it somewhere along the way, or drugs or guns or what have you. I don't sense an urgency on the part of the department in the slightest to get this done. Can you help me out?
I certainly can. I think one thing that we all need to avoid is searching for the single solution to the challenge out there. Given your circumstance that you just outlined with an A-bomb, we would not want to go ahead and put a container security device on it to be able to ensure that its integrity from point of lading, point of stuffing, all the way through to point of arrival, if that was all we were going to focus on, whether the integrity of that container was maintained. So it has to be part of a whole risk management protocol with multiple layers, beginning with that point of stuffing to make sure that we have confidence and our supply chain security specialists have actually gone there and verified that the personnel protocols, the operational protocols are secure enough so that we don't have any concerns about somebody violating the integrity of the box, and ensure it's safe transit with a device. So it will be certainly a value-added risk layer.
The question is, when are you going to get it? What's wrong? Why can't we have one today? I've been saying that for 10 years now.
And as
I get the same answer, which I can't fathom and don't understand.
And as the principal operator for CBP, we've asked for the same thing, and we're certainly are interested in the future. But we don't build these devices in our organization. We do not build these within the Department of Homeland Security.
Well,
we rely on industry.
If I were you, I would be hammering on the door of the person that does make them.
This would be private industry, and we hope that they continue to develop the appropriate solution for our use, because as we've discussed before, there is an appropriate fit for a container security device as part of a whole layered protocol.
If the administration would take just a portion of that $95 million that they're requesting for further work on the border, just a small slice of that money, and devoted it to a container security device, we could save most of the rest of the $95 million by not having to search the rail cars or the trucks going to and from Mexico. If we had a reliable device that could tell us that it's not been tampered with on the way by a corrupted truck driver, by the cartel. I rest my case. Again, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez.
Let me go back to that same question I had before on the CT pad. My understanding the way it operates, if I'm a truck driver, I have my truck, I go pick up the load and go get in line and get across, unload it, come back, get back in line and get another load and do that time and time again, and hopefully as many times I can go across. If one of those loads has, my understanding and your argument, your response was appropriate. I just want you to look in terms of how practical that's or how it's being implemented, because if those people get nailed, they tell me it takes a year for them to be able to go back to work. In some cases, 6 months to a year, and in most of those cases, based on your own data, that over 90% of those cases, it's the maquiladora and not the trucker that's involved with those, and that's based on your data. So I would just ask you to kind of look at that, please, and then and see what we might be able to do. Now, the other thing, I know that we're all concerned. In fact, I have the legislation to go southbound and start checking, but none of that should take away from the important that is what's inbound. To me, that's, of course, a much more priority, what's coming into this country. And yes, there's, and that's why I have the legislation of what's going out, because that's also important. But we need to come up with those responses, and that should not take away from that. But I know we have on this committee another Chairman Lowy that handles, and is involved with some resources to Mexico, and maybe there the Mexican government might participate in enhancing their capabilities and checking also inbound into Mexico. Making sure that, since it's their laws, that they outlaw guns into Mexico. And just for the sake, when I had been a member of Congress prior to this, I represented a previous district in the South, and we caught a lot of guns going in, as well as drugs coming out in 18-wheelers full, and it's something that we need to continue to follow through with the understanding that we don't lose track that inbound is much more critical to us than southbound, which is also important. Okay, and let me just share a couple of incidents, and it applies to both sides. In Roma and Rio Grande, many a times I was there and I saw cars that or violated traffic violations and did some other things, and they just went southbound and we couldn't catch them, just like a lot of Americans that find themselves in Mexico in trouble and cut it this way and find themselves in terms of trying to get out of trouble from Mexico. And that happens all the time there on the border. And so somehow we do need a response that we could be able to communicate quickly and catch those individuals that are either violated traffic or maybe even more serious situations. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Farr.
Mr. Rogers, I hope we can get that equipment developed, because I can't stand having to give up my bottle of water, my shaving cream, and shampoo every time I go to the airport, because a machine can't tell the difference between what's in those bottles and some other thing. So I hope technology hurries up. I'd like to ask a couple of questions. Mexico and Canada are our #1 trading partners, and California, the 6th largest economy in the world, and our leading trading partner is Mexico. We have to get a lot of commerce back and forth very quickly. And obviously, that speed with which you deliver commerce is really important to the industry. And you in the security business have to make sure that things are slowed down, checked, and so on. I'm interested on the Canadian side, because I remember some of the other hearings that as of the sort of the risk factor, that the Canadian border was a higher risk than the Mexican border because of known terrorists that had entered the United States had come across the Canadian border, and that in fact ingredients of weapons systems were detected from transshipment and across the Canadian border. Has that statistic changed now? Is the Mexican border have more, or I mean, there's a lot of thought here that it does, but have the statistics showed that we're apprehending more known terrorists on the Mexican border than we are in the Canadian border?
I think when we look at the numbers, we look at what's referred to as the tide hits, the individuals that we encounter along our borders that are actually involved with or suspicion that they're involved with potential terrorist activity or associated with a terrorist individual. And those numbers are reflected that are more significant on the northern border. The numbers on the northern border, I believe, in the 500 range, and it's less than 150 on the southern border with those encounters. But that does not that cannot be alone looked at as the indicator of what country faces the greater risk or poses the greatest risk to the United States.
But knowing that from a risk management standpoint, are we providing the same kind of detection and detail to the Canadian border as we are to the Mexican border?
Absolutely, and I would say from an anti-terrorism, counterterrorism perspective, one of our first deployment for radiation detection capability was on the northern border. When we started to build our systems for under the Western Hemisphere Travel Initiative to be able to have full document requirements, there was nothing more that was required until the 9/11 Commission and the 9/11 Act brought about the required documents to come across the border from Canada to the United States. It just could be an oral declaration. So those have certainly solidified a lot of the protocols coming across the border from Canada and the United States.
Are we building a fence across the northern border?
No, and there's not one contemplated at this time.
Although Congress, I think, asked for it.
I think the current requirement was under the Secure Fence Act was for the southern tier.
I have no further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Oberlallard.
Mr. Chairman, it's my understanding that my questions and issues were raised earlier, so I won't be repetitive.
All right, thank you. With that, we will bring this hearing to a close. I think a number of us will have additional questions to submit for the record, and we'll appreciate your prompt attention to those. In the meanwhile, let me, on behalf of all of us, thank you for your good work and for your helpful testimony here this morning. Subcommittee is adjourned.